Hey, just a quick personal note before we dive into this episode. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed with just my gratitude and joy and lessons and all the inspirations that I gained from my recent trip to Cuba. So I just finished recording this episode and I don't really have the capacity to do it again, but I want to because I feel like my thoughts weren't organized or concise, and I don't know if any of this makes sense. And I feel like in some ways I overshared, and then in other ways I didn't share enough. But really, even if you don't listen to this entire episode, which I don't expect you to, all I really hope that you receive from it is that there is so much to discover about yourself, about the world around you. There is so much joy to be felt amidst pain. There is so much that we can, uh, there's so much to be felt. That's what it is. There's so much to be felt, and life is long. They say life is short, but life is the longest thing that you will ever experience. And it's complex and layered and nuanced and meta, and so many things are happening at the same time, and it is all a lot. And you are whole, you are complete, you are worthy, you are wonderful. And I hope that you find people and places that reaffirm that for you. Okay, now let's get into this episode. Finding myself in the unlikeliest of places, aka Cuba. Hi, oh my gosh, I have so much to tell you. I just got back from a life-changing trip to Cuba, and I don't use those words lightly, even though I know that they are overused, but I had a sense that Cuba would be impactful, but I didn't know just how much so it would be. Like so much more than I expected for so many reasons that I'm going to tell you about here. And I hope that you find this episode, even though it is very personal, and my biggest intention in recording this is just capturing how I feel and this part of my life and the little teachings of Cuba that I want to carry with me. And also I have this like fantasy of one day maybe my kids will listen to this podcast and be like, oh, that's when mom went to Cuba. But I also hope that you listening to this will find it inspiring in maybe like a meta way. Well, firstly, I have not traveled on my own like this since 2018, so that's like 7 years ago. My first trip abroad is what I call my Bali breakup trip. And that's when me and a girlfriend, so I guess I wasn't really alone, but me and a friend decided to go to Bali for a whole month. And Mary, 20-year-old Mary back then, that was when I just moved back home from Canada, was dealing with a really, really bad breakup, moved into my parents' house with my tail between my legs, post heartbreak, trying to find peace in my bigger body and healing my relationship with food. And I went to Bali and I spent a month there. And that's where a lot of transformative things in my life started happening. Like my Instagram posts were going viral, and I went a whole month without like scrutinizing how I looked or hating myself for it. And I had these like very deep, enriching happenstances with the Balinese people and my really close friend at the time. And that kind of led to this idea of doing retreats for women. And one of my first ever retreats was actually in Bali. So I feel like travel changes you. And I know that's such a privileged thing to say, like it's such a luxury. It now, even after going to Cuba, I'm like, wow, what a privilege it is to have a passport, let alone an American passport where I can pretty much go wherever I want. But on top of that, it is not financially feasible for a lot of people. But I do believe that there are elements of travel that you can live by, even if you're not going far, far away on some exotic trip. You could carry these mindsets, like, for example, the idea of talking to strangers and asking them about their lives and being really kind to people and tipping generously and doing activities that you otherwise wouldn't, signing yourself up for classes and going on little adventures and just, that mindset of novelty, like everything is new and fresh and exciting. And yes, of course, that is very easy to embody when everything is quite literally new and fresh and exciting. But I believe that we can channel that, and hopefully every so often we get to travel to then bring that energy back home with us, so that we live our lives with this perspective of like, wow, everything is new and fresh and exciting, even if it's just a little, I don't know, cloud that you noticed in the sky, and you will never see that cloud in that shape ever again, or a human being you happen to cross paths with, or maybe just intimacy with yourself where you're like, I will never be the me that I am in this exact moment right now. And having that deep, like, conversation, relationship with yourself and your body, mind, and spirit. Anyway, I'm getting all abstract out there, but flash forward to almost 7 years later, after that Bali breakup trip, I've had the privilege to traveling to dozens of countries, and I loved all of them, mostly all of them, but this trip was pivotal. So firstly, why did I even want to go to Cuba? Like, I don't think that's a really popular place to go to, although I hope to change that through talking about it, sharing my positive experience. And the person who changed that for me was actually one of my really close friends, Allie. She has been to Cuba 13 times and is going twice more this year. And I was at her house yesterday and she was like, tell me everything. How was it? Like, she was so excited for me to experience it. And I was just stumped, at a loss for words. I'm like, I can't think of any other word besides just amazing. And she goes, I remember the first time I went to Cuba, the second that I left, I thought to myself, how do I get back? And that's exactly the feeling that I had too. Like, how do I get back? When am I gonna come again? Allie has prints of Cuba hanging in her dining room. And this is a woman who has been to 38, I asked her, 38 different countries, and she constantly chooses to come back to Cuba, and it is for good reason. On top of that, Cuba has some interesting ties with Russia and the former Soviet Union. I'm sure you know how delicate it was during the Cold War, and some of those influences still remain. So because I am on this path of trying to figure out what Slavic culture means to me and channeling that part of myself, even though my relationship with my father is quite shattered, I feel like this piece of me kind of like broke off when he chose to leave my life. And because it like broke off against my will, I also just like am constantly trying to fun fact about me, I actually wrote my college entrance essay about, I think I called it something like my cultural identity crisis. And it was about just me, especially as a teen. And I wish I could say it changed as an adult, but I actually have more questions than I do answers. But just trying to reconcile all these different parts of my cultural identity between the language I speak and also like in Russia, like my mom leaving Russia because she was a marginalized person there, but then also my dad being like Russian, and then completely denying all that anti-Semitism that went on, and then him just constantly being back and forth, and growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area where there's a big Russian community. And so I was like not only the eldest daughter, but like the only grandchild surrounded by adults, and not just adults, but like Russian babushkas adults. You know what I mean? Like Russian grandmothers who just like fed me and just instilled this like culture into me, and I find myself hanging on to that. And then on top of that, I also married somebody who's Russian speaking, who comes from a totally different part of the former Soviet Union, who's also Jewish, but a different type of Jew than I am or than my family is, and has been able to preserve a lot of that. So there's just so much. It is like so dense. And Cuba really called to me because like it's like a part of the story. Do you know what I mean? And to my surprise, like for example, my guide, Leo, he knew some of those classic old Soviet Union cartoons and could like literally sing the songs from them. And there was this one moment where we were driving in a convertible and Leo was talking to the taxi driver who doesn't speak any English. So he's like translating to Spanish, and he's like, do you know that cartoon called the Musicians of Bremen. Mary knows all the words because she speaks Russian. So then he blasted it in the car, like totally surprised me. He blasted it in the convertible and we're all just like singing it, like literally singing this. I could just cry thinking about it. It's this cartoon from my childhood, my mom's childhood, like not just my childhood, my mom's childhood that I grew up with, that now my husband and I like listen to in the house just because it's one way we try to keep up that connection with our culture. And it was just like so, I mean, across oceans and mountains and cultures and time, like through all of that, this one silly little Soviet Union cartoon called The Musicians of Bremen, Bremenski Muzikante, just like tied us together in that moment. I mean, that is stuff you cannot plan, and you cannot prepare yourself for the like emotional richness of that type of human connection. Again, it goes beyond sharing a language, talking about ideas. You know what I mean? It is just like a pure soul. Both of our childhoods were partially built on this, and now we are sharing it together. Anyway, so that's like one thing that Allie actually mentioned to me when she was telling me about this trip and convincing me to go. She's like, you know, Cuba has all these interesting ties with the Soviet Union. You'll see, you'll love it. Please go. And it didn't take much convincing, because I'm sure you figured out, like, I just love going the road less traveled. I love places that are raw and real and rich. And I love who I am when I travel, but especially when I can be immersed in the culture. You know, it's a different, you know, the difference between travel and vacation. And I think even some of my other trips, like my honeymoon to Tanzania, for example, like, of course, that was more of a vacation. I didn't really get immersed in Tanzanian culture as much as I wanted to. But the night before I left for Cuba, my husband and I were on a walk, and he said, "What are you most looking forward to?" And I said, "Of course, everything. But do you remember how when we were in Tanzania on safari, our driver, our tour guide, would like pause the Land Cruiser, like stop the Land Cruiser if he saw somebody drive by that he knew, and he would stop, he would roll down his window, and he would have this whole conversation with this like fellow tour guide driver that he knew while we were on safari." I said, that's what I'm looking forward to. Those moments of like people knowing each other and watching that friendship and those interactions. I could do that all day long. I feel like, well, I don't know about you, but I feel like most people are like, okay, I have places to go, people to see. Let's get to the animals. Let's get to the excursion. Let's, you know what I mean? What I'm there for. But for me, I travel for those in between moments. I remember one of my first ever trips with my mom. She so kindly took me on a cruise, which I don't do anymore. Do not agree with the ethics of cruises at all. But, you know, when we know better, we do better. But 10 years ago, it was really exciting that she could afford to take us on a cruise as my graduation present. And we stopped in Belize. And I remember driving the golf cart in Belize with our tour guide, and he was just taking us around his island. It was so beautiful. My mom and I were having a blast. I'm pretty sure it was just the three of us, because I think everybody, like her husband and my little sister, they stayed back on the boat. So it was just my mom and me and our guide in Belize. And he would, same thing, would be driving the golf cart, and then he'd like wave to somebody, and I'd be like, "Who's that?" He'd be like, "My cousin, my aunt, my sister, my brother-in-law." And I just love those moments and those places where everybody like knows each other, and they're all just like, they will never pretend not to know each other. They will never miss an opportunity to say hello, how are you, and actually listen to the answer. I think that is something that really differs from American culture, is that ability to just pause and be with people. So anyway, I love watching people talk to their friends. And then when Allie connected me with Heart of Travel, it caught me at this perfect time. Like, I am trying to say yes to adventure, especially before I start a family, get pregnant. You know, I think, of course, something like travel will be harder to do with kids. And I'm also like really lost in my career right now. And I'm not sharing this to like complain and be like, woe is me, because I'm actually feeling really at peace with it. But just like the fact of the matter is that I don't have any retreats planned right now. Brand deals are few and far between. There's no consistent source of income. My podcast listenership has been a painfully slow growth, and I feel demotivated and burnt out on social media. So I'm quite conflicted about what direction to go next. And I'm not saying that travel solves all problems. And again, big privilege, big luxury, but it does have this like innate positive benefit of pulling you out of your daily routine and showing you new perspectives, widening your horizons. And by seeing and learning about the world, you're also seeing and learning about new parts of yourself. So I just am constantly trying to put myself in places and around people that help me do that. And I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to go on this heart of travel trip to Cuba. By the way, I highly recommend going with this tour company. It's an ethical travel agency that does tours all over Latin America, including Cuba. I don't know if I would recommend trying to like go to Cuba on your own. More on that later. But in case you're like, Mary, I don't even need to hear more about it, I'm signing myself up as we speak, then I did talk to the owner, Chelsea. She became a good friend. Actually, if you've been a podcast listener for a while, you know that Chelsea, the owner of Heart of Travel, came on the podcast on episode 126. And again, this was through the connection with Allie, and she's just such a cool, badass businesswoman. And the episode title is called Travel That Makes You a Better Person. Not how travel makes you a better person, specifically travel that makes you a better person. That's episode 126. I'll link that for you in the description in case you're interested. But Chelsea is the owner of this company, Heart of Travel. And their whole mission is ethical travel, supporting local businesses, small businesses, entrepreneurs, artists, like really being immersed in authentic stories, like genuine connection, not just, placing you in the best hotel and showing you the best reviewed restaurant, especially with Cuba. I cannot stress this enough, but especially with Cuba, you want to make sure that you are going there consciously and aware of a lot of the historical, political, economical contexts that you don't get if you're just staying at a resort. Also, if you're a US citizen, it is illegal to just go and stay at a resort. Well, okay, let me get to that. So the disclaimer, like all countries, disclaimer to the disclaimer, hold on. Disclaimer to the disclaimer, I am limited as to what I can ethically say, okay? I'm just gonna leave it there. Like all countries, I wrote this part out because I wanted to get it right and not overstep my boundaries. Like all countries, Cuba's politics, economics, history is very deep, dense, and dark at times. Some quick research, which please do, especially if you're considering going to Cuba or Latin America or any part of the world that is different than your own. Some quick research will highlight how Cuba is an exceptional case, since I ethically cannot talk about it for a few reasons. So do your own research. Just because I went to Cuba once doesn't mean I'm an expert. I really invite you to learn from people who are actually knowledgeable and living through it. So please read up on Cuba and experience it for yourself if you can. With that, I refuse to be like, I don't know how to say this without being like, what is that called? Virtue signaling. I just want to explain to you the situation. I refuse to be another white person that romanticizes other people's pain. Someone in my DMs called it poverty porn, and I don't want to contribute to that by any means. So in this episode and on social media, I'll be sharing mostly positive aspects of Cuba because that's what I experienced, and also out of care and respect for the Cuban people who greatly rely on tourism. So there's this there's a few ethical considerations that I have to be cautious about, but you can do your own research, okay? But if you do decide to go, and I really, really hope you do, please make sure you travel consciously. Let me explain to you. So, the biggest stereotype and misconception is that Americans cannot travel to Cuba because of the embargo. Actually, legally, as of 2012, so it's been over 10 years that you've been able to go to Cuba, US citizens can go under this OFAC category called, and they'll just ask you this in a questionnaire when you travel. The category is called Support for the Cuban People, which is exactly what you'll be doing, which is exactly what we want you to do. You'll be staying at what's called Casa Particulares, which is like private homes. You'll eat at paladores, which are local restaurants, and explore with Cuban guides who will tell you some more of that background and history and share with you that culture, and you'll just be really immersed in that experience. So like I said before, if you're a US citizen, it's illegal to just stay at regular resorts. If you do some research, you'll know why. If you're Canadian or European, you technically can do whatever you want, but I still highly recommend supporting local, again, everywhere you go, but especially here. Like I said, my trip was organized by Heart of Travel. They do ethical small group trips all over Latin America, so you won't be alone. Like my guide and I were like this, attached 24/7. He took us everywhere, and I was also with another couple, so it was really a small, intimate group tour. And like I said, I got pretty close with Chelsea, the owner, through knowing each other through our mutual friend Allie, and I convinced her to give you a discount on any Heart of Travel trips in case you're interested. That code is Mary150. If you go to heartoftravel.org, you'll see all their trips, and I think they have a Cuba trip coming up in March, which I'm really strongly considering going to again. Like really, really strongly. So maybe you'll see me there, but Mary 150 will give you $150 off. This is not an ad. I don't get anything from this. Chelsea offered me commission, but I said, no, like, please give my commission as a bonus to the Cuban people, especially the tour guides. And if you're not, or if you're more interested or not convinced, then please listen to episode 126 with Chelsea. She's just such an incredible soul and is doing really great work, especially, teetering that delicate balance between being a US citizen, a white person, operating tours in Latin America, but doing so exceptionally consciously and with the utmost regard for the people, paying them properly, making sure that all of her clients are aware to a point where, like, it is not possible to go on a trip like this and not walk away feeling changed. I just feel so passionately about this company. Anyway, let me tell you, this was a 20-minute intro because now I can tell you about how Cuba altered my brain chemistry. I have 5 big themes and lessons that really stuck out to me. So firstly, instantly, all the preconceived notions are shattered, right? Like as soon as you tell somebody, yeah, I'm headed to Cuba, they're going to be like, what? Oh my God. Like, how could you, are you Americans allowed to go there? Like, oh, that's so scary. I would never, right? Like I heard that time and time again. So instantly you're like, no, actually it's pretty safe. It's one of the safest countries in Latin America. You actually can go there. It actually does have a lot to offer. So immediately, even before you go, all those preconceived notions, all those stereotypes, judgments, prejudices just melt away. The first person I met at the airport was a man from Guantanamo who was a doctor there. And as soon as he said, I'm from Guantanamo, I was like, wow, my husband is going to love this. Because again, there's all these stereotypes. Like all Americans really know about Cuba is maybe the Bay of Pigs, missile crisis, and Guantanamo Bay, right? Like really dark, negative things. So when this doctor from Guantanamo said, I'm from Guantanamo, I was like, wait, what? I was like, I'm sorry for my ignorance, but what do you mean you're from Guantanamo? And he said, okay, let me educate you, girl. Guantanamo is an entire province with lots of people living there. And I'm from there, and I was a doctor, and then I got so lucky to get access to the US, and through that, I had to leave my pregnant baby mama who had a son while I was gone, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity. So now he's going back to Guantanamo, which, mind you, is a 14-hour drive from Havana, because the roads aren't developed. And it's technically not a really big island, but it takes 14 hours to get to that side of the island. And he's taking his 86-year-old grandma with him, picking her up in Havana, driving to Guantanamo to meet his 2-year-old son that he has not met because he came to the US and is trying to rebuild his life. Like, that is the first conversation that I had when I landed. Stepped off the plane and immediately, started chatting. The first woman, as I'm driving into Havana in the taxi, I got picked up by the Heart of Travel team, and it was so nice. And as we're driving into the city, I'm having my looking out the window moment, all the anticipations, all the excitement. The first woman that I kind of lock eyes with as we drive into the city is breastfeeding her child while walking down the streets, like completely open, just walking pretty quickly. Like, she had somewhere to be, but gotta feed that kid, And I just love that. Why did I love it? Because the US is so conservative and in my ways dated in that regard as to how we treat mothers, how we treat women's bodies, how there's so much shame around something as fucking natural as feeding your child. And the fact that I just saw that out in the open, I was like, and I feel at home. Like, I am so aligned with this. And lastly, I mentioned this, but like, I felt really safe there. Of course, I was with my tour guide 99% of the time, but even the times that I had to walk home, or I took a walk the morning before I left, just had a moment to myself, like, felt so safe, left my stuff on a bench to film content, I don't know, just felt really comfortable in my own skin. More on that later. Even when I was in the small village and we were walking back from the bar at 1 a.m, Yenny and I, who is my house host, like, just so peaceful, so quiet, felt so safe. Of course, you got to have your wits about you anywhere you go. But I read, like, in 2016, the murder rate actually in Cuba was lower than it was in the US. So again, I don't know, sometimes statistics get a little bit skewed. But all that to say, like, I have felt way more uncomfortable on the streets of New York than I ever have in places like Cuba, Guatemala, Colombia, Mexico. Like, I've been to these places and it depends where you go, right? Just like anywhere. The second way that it just really impacted me, the trip to Cuba, is that Cubans as people, they just treat you with this sense of familiarity, like you're an old friend, but not in a kiss-ass sort of way, Like, I've been to places, I would say, like, when I was in Bali, for example, the hospitality there is so extreme that it almost makes you feel uncomfortable. Like, it's just, a lot. And I feel more relaxed when I'm visiting a place where they don't really care about me or they don't pay that much attention to me and let me just kind of exist. Again, I don't know if that's like a weird thing to say, but I just loved how Cubans, like, they'll invite you to play a game of domino, but they're not going to let you win. You know what I mean? Or I don't even know how to explain it. Like, they don't go out of their way to, like, please you or appease you. They do have this sense of pride, not in an arrogant way, but more like they just want to share themselves with you, but like an authentic part of themselves. You know what I mean? Not trying to like fabricate or be over the top or just be like super duper people pleasing nice. So when someone offers you a coffee, like, it's not just a coffee because they feel obligated to give you a coffee. Like, no, it's this like invitation, like, be with me. Let's pause, let's share stories, let's connect. And even though there is a language barrier, you might not understand every word, but you kind of just walk away from these people feeling like you've known them for years, over something as simple as like a coffee or some rum or a game of domino, which at first I was like, okay, cool. Like, I used to play this with my great grandfather. So it was really fun for me, to just, nobody else I've ever played with besides him. And now I'm playing with a bunch of Cubans. Like, it was awesome. But at first it was like just a game of domino. And then you realize like how big it is in their culture that a game of domino isn't just a game of domino. It's like, it's fun, it's playful, it's strategic, it's connecting, it's all of the above. Like, it was just so fun. It's fun too, And speaking of that, Cuba has what I call, I quote, what is it called? I named this, coined this. That's the word I'm looking for. I coined this as existing culture, existing where you are, exactly how you are. If you've ever visited an island, you know that there's this like notion of island time. And sometimes they say it in a humorous way, like, yeah, it's like island time. Everything kind of happens more slowly on an island. And at first it's confusing because you're like, okay, what are we doing next? Where are we going? Where do I put myself? And then once you lean into that and you realize, like, oh, we don't have anywhere else to be but here. Like, this is what we're doing. We're playing domino. And it's not like playing just a couple rounds of domino. It's like we might play 20 games of domino because there's nothing else. And again, I don't want this to be like romanticizing. I say this with love and care, but there is really nothing else to do besides being with the people you're with. And like I said, like Cuban people aren't trying to entertain you or please you or fix you. Like they won't come up to you and be like, "Are you okay? Do you have everything you need? Can I show you where the bathroom is? Do you want another drink?" They are like, the hospitality is there for sure. Don't get me wrong, but they're more like, just exist with us. Let's talk, let's laugh, let's tell stories, let's just hang, like literally just hang. At the tobacco farm that we visited, the farmer told us about how even cigars, like rolling and smoking cigars is a ritual. Having coffee, rum, it's also a ritual. Dancing salsa, making art, playing music, like, oh, the music, it all feels so sacred because amidst pain, humans still find this deep joy, and it involves the avenue, the vehicle of that deep joy is this deep connection to self, to others, and to the world, right? Like to self, where you're just existing, to others, where you're connecting, and to the world, where you are like making art, you're seeing things, you're creating something beautiful out of pretty like little resources. And it is another white girl that says it's inspiring, but it is, like, it just is. It made me think about how often we rush through our own rituals, right? Like we drink coffee while answering emails, and then we play music in the background. We don't really like sit and listen to music anymore. And in Cuba, everything just felt more intentional, even the smallest things. And the most beautiful part is that they're not doing these rituals in the pursuit of self-help, right? To talk about it on a podcast. They are doing it because it's just ingrained to the mindset and the culture and the way of life. And of course, under extenuating circumstances and out of like, I guess, necessity, like that's how you survive, as you find joy amidst pain. But yeah, it is really, really, really eye-opening. Yeah. Okay. The next point, and then I'll touch on the most like, how do I say this? Okay, two more things. So the next one is going to branch off of that existing culture, like being virtually disconnected, yet physically the most connected I've ever felt in my entire adult life. Again, are you sick of my caveats? But I just feel the need to over explain that I hear a lot of people, especially people who have traveled to places like Cuba, say like, it feels like you're traveling back in time. It's so nice to be disconnected. It is so much slower and blah, blah, blah. And like, I think that that's cool if you have the privilege to come home to resources and opportunities, and so that you could juxtapose that against everything that is at your disposal. Do you know what I mean? But not if it's like not a choice, right? Like if you don't have a say in that, if you don't have autonomy, if you don't have resources and opportunities. So in that case, like it does come across as really ignorant to be like, wow, there's no Wi-Fi. I was very disconnected and present. because it actually does suck that there's no Wi-Fi most places. But coming from a hyper-industrialized society, I don't remember the last time that I was that like actually disconnected. Like even at retreats, we have a pretty strict no phone policy, but that's no phones in the presence of another person. So I know that my retreat people will go back to their room and probably text their friends or take a peek at social media or I don't know, pull out their phone for something or other. Like it is accessible, right? We're just trying to resist it. In Cuba, like it's just not accessible. There might be a hotspot at the nice accommodations that Heart of Travel puts us in. There usually is. But, a lot of times it doesn't work. And every time they said, sorry, it's not working and they're trying to fix it, I'm like, no, 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 don't even try to fix it. I'm so happy it's not working because for me, that is the luxury for me is being able to disconnect, or not the luxury, but for me, the like, it's good for me is all I'm trying to say. Like it's good for me to not have access to Wi-Fi. So anyway, that like if you are very much hustle and grind, can't get a break, really, really want to slow down, but even if you were to take a typical vacation, you know that you would probably still be connected or at least like thinking about getting connected in Cuba between the existing culture and the presence and the amount of fun that you're going to be having, you're not even going to want your phone. And I personally liked that, again, because I'm privileged enough to come home to resources and opportunities. Lastly, and this was something that they didn't really register until I was brainstorming for this podcast, but there is this level of sex appeal. Like Cuba's sexy. Like a lot of Latin American countries, like sexuality is a little bit more ingrained into the music and the dance and the dynamics between people. And of course, there is that like traditional machismo. But at the same time, there's this big LGBTQ scene, and everyone I met was really open-minded and like this playful energy. You know what I mean? And I think that's actually a byproduct. I started thinking more deeply about it. I believe that like sexy energy is a byproduct of being fully present. Because think about it, you can't be playful, you can't crack a joke, you can't, I don't know, just be like really embodied, right, in your own sexuality, unless the prerequisite to that is being like really solid, comfortable, present in your skin. So you can only be playful if you're already like confident that the playfulness will be well received. Do you know what I mean? Here's a better way to explain it. One of the first TED Talks that I ever watched is called The Power of Seduction in Our Everyday Lives. I think this TED Talk is over 10 years old, and it's by this woman named Chen Lizra, who's a dancer. And I remember her talking about Latin America. So I went and rewatched the TED Talk today, and guess what country she was talking about? Cuba. Over the past 2 decades, she has spent extensive amount of time specifically in Cuba studying dance and seduction, and now she's a somatic intelligence practitioner, and I think her message is just really cool. And she basically, I mean, it's funny because in watching that TED Talk in 2025, I'm kind of like, ooh, like I wonder if some people would misconstrue this message because we have gotten very like, I don't know, like boundaries, right? And like, don't look at anyone, don't touch anyone, don't, right? But she's not talking about violating consent. In fact, the opposite. She's talking about this power of like this exchange between humans where you're just really connected, and yeah, it's flirtatious and it's playful and it's fun and it's sexy. And like Cubans live by that. They live like that. And I scrolled through the comments and there were so many Cuban people commenting being like, I'm from Cuba, she gets us. Multiple comments. Like I wouldn't be sharing this TED Talk with you unless I knew that it was, aligned with the culture. But there is this like body language and eye contact and undivided attention and self-confidence and a sense of pride in your existence and connection with the people that you cross paths with. Cubans are just like that. I don't know. It's just so hot to me. And you want to talk body image. You know how I told you that in Bali, I was on a body image journey already, and I felt so liberated from my body image struggles because I was just doing cool things and not looking at myself and in a place where nobody knew me. So that took a lot of the pressure and shame away. But in Cuba, there's such great diversity. There's huge racial diversity, there's big body diversity, there's again a big LGBTQ scene. Like I just loved it. I just loved it. I was kind of contrasting that with something I'm worried about is taking my little sister to France. I'm hoping, because she's an artist, and I hope to just continue inspiring her in that way. And I thought France, go to the museum, see the Mona Lisa, all that stuff. But I'm a little bit nervous, like even for myself, because thinness is still such an ideal, right? Not in Cuba. Like women's bodies are celebrated. Maybe sometimes a little bit too much, because yes, there is catcalling. And I don't know how to explain it, but it doesn't feel as threatening. Again, I don't know if it's just because I'm traveling and I saw everything so positively, but it felt like very soft, I suppose. Like you would walk by somebody and they'd be like, oh, okay, Linda, like so pretty, It didn't feel like shouting across the street, like, hey, sexy, like, it was different. It just felt different. And that TED Talk, I'm going to link that for you in the description as well, with Chen Lizra. She describes exactly like what that kind of like sensual Cuban mindset is like. So between the music and nightlife and arts, culture, dance, those sexy vibes, like I think Cuba would make for such a memorable girls trip. Like if you and a friend or you and a couple of friends signed up for the next Heart of Travel trip going to Cuba, you would have the freaking time of your life. So I don't know. I feel like I didn't do it justice. I feel like I want to re-record this whole podcast episode, because I'm now realizing that I didn't even really tell you about everything that we did there. Like we did a historic walking tour. We did an street art graffiti tour. We did a farm tour, a tobacco tour. We rolled cigars. We smoked them. We danced. There was so much live music. There was so much good food. We ate at like local farms where I got to like hold animals and pet them. And we did this like classic car tour, because of course, Cuba's known for that, but I don't really want to talk about that too much because there's so much more to Cuba than the classic cars, but it was cool to see all the rich history, as complicated as it is, and the effects of that decades later. It was equal parts heartbreaking and heartwarming. I read a blog post where the girl wrote, like, Cuba is one of those places that breaks your heart into a million pieces and then somehow puts them back together. So it was a giant lesson in gratitude and inner peace and confidence and connection, which are some of my biggest values in life. And I really hope you get to experience it one day too. I want to leave you with this poem that I wrote a couple years back that just really describes how travel in general makes me feel. I love who I am when I'm traveling. My hair is greasy, my clothes are wrinkled. I don't know what day it is or what I'm doing tomorrow, but I'm eating ice cream for breakfast and dancing with strangers after dinner. I'm going to places I never thought I would, not caring to be better or smarter or thinner. When nothing makes sense, my nonsense is okay, and I am finally free.